The school bell rang, signaling the start of another mundane day at Westbrook High. Malik sighed as he shuffled into the classroom, his sneakers scuffing against the tiled floor. He couldn't help but glance at the clock, another long day of waiting for the bell to ring again. What he didn't know was that today would be different. Today, everything was about to change. "All right, class, listen up." Mrs. Wainwright's voice cut through the chatter as she walked to the front of the room. "We have a very important test today. No excuses, no talking. Everyone needs to show what they're really made of." Malik sat in the back, rolling his eyes. He had heard it all before. Another test, another chance for Mrs. Wainwright to look down on him. After all, she had never been kind to him. He wasn't the best student in her eyes, not even close. He didn't come from money, he didn't wear the latest clothes, and his grades had been average at best. But Malik knew something Mrs. Wainwright didn't: he was far more capable than anyone ever realized. As Mrs. Wainwright handed out the tests, she gave Malik a quick glance. It was a look he had gotten used to over the years, one that said, "You're not going to pass this. You're not capable of being anything special." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Malik was brilliant. His IQ was off the charts, a genius hiding in plain sight. He had always kept his talents hidden, unsure if anyone would accept him if they knew the truth. As the test papers landed in front of him, Malik stared at the questions. Mrs. Wainwright had given him the hardest ones, assuming he wouldn't be able to handle them. But Malik wasn't worried. This was his time to shine. This was his moment to prove that he was more than just the kid from the wrong side of the tracks. He was about to show them all what a real genius could do. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The bell rang, signaling the start of another routine day at Westbrook High School. Students shuffled into the classroom, dragging their feet, chatting, and preparing to survive yet another dull stretch of lessons. But Malik didn't feel the usual apathy that came with being in class. Today, something felt different. Something was in the air, something that felt bigger. Malik sat down at his desk in the back of the room, pulling his worn backpack off his shoulders. His eyes scanned the classroom, momentarily lingering on the clock. It was 8:15 a.m. The bell that would free him from school in a few hours felt like a lifetime away. He shifted in his seat, letting out a long, slow breath, but it wasn't the usual frustration he felt before school. Today was the day he would prove something he hadn't been able to explain even to himself. Today, Malik was going to change the way people saw him. Mrs. Wainwright, the stern and icy teacher who had always looked at him with disdain, stood at the front of the class, shuffling through papers. As she did, her cold eyes glanced over the students, and when they landed on Malik, they narrowed, her lips twisting into a barely perceptible sneer. She assumed, like everyone else, that Malik was just another student who would never amount to much. He was from the wrong neighborhood, with the wrong kind of family, the wrong clothes, everything about him screamed average. But there was one thing Mrs. Wainwright didn't know: Malik was far from average. "All right, class, listen up." Mrs. Wainwright's voice cut through the chatter, her tone sharp. "Today is the big test. This is going to count for a lot of your grade, so I expect you to give it your best. No excuses, no talking. Just focus. You've had plenty of time to prepare." Malik didn't need to prepare. He knew the material better than anyone in that room. And he knew that this test wasn't just going to be about his grades, it was going to be a moment where everything shifted. He couldn't quite explain it, but deep down, he felt that today was his chance to show the world, especially Mrs. Wainwright, exactly who he was. She handed out the test papers with a thin smile, glancing at him one more time, as if she were anticipating his failure. He could feel her eyes on him, practically daring him to mess up. Malik had never been one to draw attention to himself, but in this moment, he was determined to do the impossible, to defy every assumption she had about him. As the test papers landed in front of him, Malik's heart beat faster. The questions were hard, but not hard for him. He had a secret, one that he had kept hidden for years. He had a genius IQ. It wasn't something he talked about, in fact, it was something he actively hid. People didn't expect much from kids like him, especially kids from neighborhoods like his. Being smart, too smart, was dangerous. It made you a target, an outcast. So he learned early on to mask his abilities, to blend in with the crowd, to avoid being noticed. But that was all about to change. Today, Malik would let his brilliance shine through, even if it meant challenging everything that people thought they knew about him. He unfolded the test, and for a moment, everything around him faded away. The hum of the air conditioning, the shuffling of papers, the whispers between students, it all melted into the background. The only thing that mattered was the paper in front of him and the questions it posed. His mind worked in overdrive, each question feeling like an opportunity to prove himself. He started with the hardest questions first, the ones that everyone else would struggle with. As he scanned the problem, a sense of calm washed over him. This was what he had been waiting for, the moment when he could show that he wasn't just another average student, but someone capable of extraordinary things. He scribbled down his answers quickly, his pencil moving in swift, fluid strokes. The solution to each problem seemed to come naturally, like a puzzle finally falling into place. Malik glanced up briefly, catching Mrs. Wainwright's gaze. She was watching him carefully, her brow furrowed in what could only be described as disbelief. He could tell she didn't expect him to do well, and in a strange way, that pushed him even harder. He finished the first section of the test in record time, his confidence growing with each completed question. For the next hour, Malik continued to work through the test, barely noticing the time passing. He knew he was going to finish first, and he knew his answers would be right. In fact, he was sure that he would finish with a perfect score, but it wasn't about the grade anymore. It was about the message. He had to prove that he was more than what people saw, that his worth wasn't defined by where he came from, or the expectations others placed on him. As the final minutes of the test ticked away, Malik sat back in his chair, letting out a deep breath. He had done it. He had answered every question, and not just correctly, he had done it with the kind of ease and precision that no one in the room would have expected from him. Mrs. Wainwright walked up and down the aisles of the classroom, collecting the tests. As she passed by Malik's desk, she shot him another look. This time, there was something different in her eyes, something that might have been respect, but it was buried beneath layers of disbelief. She probably hadn't expected this from him. No, she never expected it from him. But Malik knew that once those tests were graded, she would have no choice but to see him differently. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class. Students gathered their things, chatting excitedly about the test and how they felt they had done. Malik was quiet, his thoughts swirling as he stood up to leave. He didn't talk to anyone as he gathered his books and walked toward the door. His heart still raced from the adrenaline of the test, but a part of him knew that this was just the beginning. As Malik walked out of the classroom, he didn't look back. He knew that no matter what happened next, his life was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. And no matter how Mrs. Wainwright felt about him, he was ready to show the world who he truly was. Malik had always known what it felt like to be underestimated. He grew up in a neighborhood where people had to fight for their survival. Westbrook was one of those places where opportunities seemed scarce, and people were expected to stay in their lane, follow the rules, and avoid drawing attention to themselves. But Malik was different. He wasn't going to follow the crowd. From a young age, he realized that his mind worked in ways that set him apart from most kids in his neighborhood. His mother, Tanisha, was a single parent who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Despite her exhaustion, she always made time for Malik. She was his rock, the person who believed in him even when the world around them didn't. Malik remembered her constant words of encouragement, "You're meant for something bigger, Malik. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But it was hard. Every day, Malik had to fight to be seen. To be heard. As he grew older, he understood that being smart, being a genius, was a blessing, but also a curse. In his neighborhood, intelligence wasn't valued. People respected strength, toughness, and street smarts. Brains weren't cool, and being the smart kid was an easy way to get picked on. Malik learned early on to keep his intelligence hidden, to make sure no one noticed that he could solve complex problems in seconds, that he could read a whole book in one night, or that he could ace any test without breaking a sweat. It wasn't that Malik didn't want to show his true abilities, it was more that he knew, from experience, how dangerous it could be. His classmates didn't understand him, and neither did many of his teachers. He was always the quiet kid in the back of the class, not because he didn't want to participate, but because he was afraid of standing out. Being invisible was safer. He could see how people treated the kids who stood out, who were different. It was never kindness or respect. It was mockery, jealousy, and isolation. The only person who seemed to truly see Malik was his mentor, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson was a retired engineer who had moved into the neighborhood a few years ago, hoping to escape the chaos of city life. When he first met Malik, he noticed the spark in his eyes, a curiosity and intelligence that no one else seemed to recognize. At first, Malik had been suspicious of Mr. Thompson, unsure of why someone so different would want to talk to him. But over time, Malik came to understand that Mr. Thompson wasn't like the others. He didn't care where Malik came from, what his family had, or whether he fit in. He saw Malik for who he was, a smart, talented kid who had potential. Mr. Thompson began tutoring Malik after school. He was the only one who had ever pushed Malik to be better, not just for his grades, but for himself. Malik didn't realize it at the time, but those afternoons spent with Mr. Thompson were shaping his future. The old man had a way of making learning exciting, of showing Malik that his intelligence wasn't something to hide, it was something to embrace. They would spend hours talking about engineering, science, and history, and Malik would always leave feeling inspired. He began to understand that there was so much more to the world than the streets of Westbrook. But no matter how much Malik wanted to rise above his circumstances, there were still the constant challenges. He had a hard time fitting in. He was smart, but that didn't win him friends. Most of the kids at Westbrook High didn't care about math competitions or science fairs. They cared about sports, fashion, and status. Malik had none of those things. He wore the same pair of sneakers for months, couldn't afford the latest gear, and didn't hang out in the popular crowd. As a result, he was often overlooked, a shadow in a sea of faces. It didn't help that Mrs. Wainwright, his history teacher, was among the many people who doubted him. She had already made up her mind about Malik. She assumed that he wouldn't do well in class, just like so many others had before her. She never bothered to engage with him, never asked for his input during lessons. Instead, she placed him in the back of the room and often skipped over him when calling on students to answer questions. Malik couldn't blame her entirely. He was used to people assuming he wasn't capable of much. He had seen it all his life, people in his neighborhood who didn't believe in their potential, teachers who didn't think they were worth their time, and classmates who treated him like an outsider. He had learned to accept it, to stay quiet and avoid confrontation. After all, what was the point of fighting back when everyone had already made up their minds about who you were? But deep down, Malik had dreams that no one could see. He wanted to go to college, to make something of himself, to show the world that where you came from didn't define your future. He knew he was capable of greatness, even if no one else did. His mother believed in him. Mr. Thompson believed in him. But Malik had yet to truly believe in himself. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a kid from Westbrook, a place filled with stereotypes, judgments, and limited expectations. But Malik also saw someone who was different, someone who had more to offer than anyone could understand. He had a genius IQ, a mind that could change the world. But first, he had to prove it to himself. And that was the hardest part. As Malik sat at his desk in the back of Mrs. Wainwright's class, he glanced around the room. His classmates were all focused on the upcoming test, but Malik wasn't worried. He knew he could pass it easily. He wasn't worried about the grade, he was worried about something bigger. Something that would change everything. This wasn't just any test. This was the moment when everything would change. Malik was ready. Ready to stop being the kid in the back of the class, ready to stop hiding his intelligence. It was time for the world to see him for who he really was. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. As students filed out of the room, Malik stood up, grabbing his backpack. Mrs. Wainwright gave him another dismissive glance as he walked past her, but Malik didn't care. He had already made up his mind. Today was the day. Today, everything was going to change. The day of the test felt like a ticking time bomb. For Malik, it wasn't just about passing the exam, it was about shaking off the expectations everyone had for him. He was tired of being the quiet kid in the back. Tired of hiding behind his genius, behind the mask of mediocrity that he had worn for years. Walking into Mrs. Wainwright's classroom the next morning, Malik could feel the tension in the air. His classmates were all talking in hushed tones, nervous about the test. Most of them had spent the night cramming, poring over their textbooks, but Malik knew that no amount of last-minute studying would help them. This wasn't just any test, this was a test of character, a test to see who would rise above and who would fall. He made his way to his desk, sitting down without a word. The room was filled with the sound of nervous shuffling as people unpacked their bags, fiddling with pens and notebooks. Mrs. Wainwright stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the class with an air of calculated authority. She didn't waste any time. "All right, class, you all know what this test is about," Mrs. Wainwright announced, her voice cool and detached. "It's your chance to prove yourselves. No talking, no distractions. If I see any cheating, you're out." Malik could feel her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than usual. He didn't let it bother him. He had seen that look before, the kind that said, "I expect you to fail." He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Mrs. Wainwright handed out the test papers with a sense of finality. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he unfolded the paper in front of him. As he scanned the questions, a feeling of calm washed over him. This was easy, way too easy. He felt like he had seen every single one of these questions before. In fact, he had. He could solve these problems in his sleep. The equations were simple, the history questions straightforward. The only challenge was not finishing too early. Malik began writing his answers, his pencil flying across the paper with ease. His mind raced through the problems with a precision that felt almost automatic. He didn't need to think hard. Everything just clicked. And as he worked, he couldn't help but notice the nervous energy coming from the rest of the class. The kids around him were sweating, biting their nails, struggling to get through even the simplest of questions. Malik allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. He was ahead of everyone, and it felt good. But there was also a part of him that knew this wasn't just about getting the answers right. This was about sending a message. He wasn't just another kid in the back of the class. He was a genius, and he wasn't going to let anyone ignore that anymore. But then, as if on cue, something unexpected happened. Malik's pencil suddenly paused mid-air. He had been so caught up in his own rhythm, so focused on finishing the test, that he hadn't realized what was going on around him. Mrs. Wainwright had started walking up and down the aisles of the classroom, stopping at each student's desk, her eyes scanning their work. She stopped right behind Malik, her presence so close that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. He continued writing, determined not to let her throw him off. But then, her voice cut through the silence, sharp and condescending. "Malik, are you even trying?" Mrs. Wainwright's voice was low, but everyone in the class heard it. Malik's hand froze for a second, but he didn't look up. He knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to bait him, trying to get him to react. She thought he was coasting through the test, not even making an effort. It was the same assumption everyone had always made about him. He wasn't good enough. He didn't belong in the same room as the smart kids. But this time, Malik wasn't going to let her get away with it. He looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time in weeks. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. Just pure focus. "I'm trying," he said calmly. "But I don't think you're used to seeing someone actually do the work without struggling." A few heads turned in his direction. Some of the kids in the class seemed surprised. Most of them had never heard Malik speak up like that before. He wasn't a loud kid. He wasn't one to cause a scene. But today, something had shifted inside him. Mrs. Wainwright's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, don't get too cocky, Malik," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You still have to finish. We'll see how well you do in the end." Malik didn't respond. He just went back to his test, his mind laser-focused on the questions in front of him. He wasn't about to let her, or anyone else, undermine him. He had worked too hard to get to this point. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room grew thicker. The sound of pencils scratching paper was the only noise that filled the air. Malik finished the test long before anyone else, his answers written with the kind of confidence he had never shown before. He looked around at his classmates, many of them still sweating over the test, struggling to get through the questions. He knew he had already won. This wasn't about the grade anymore, it was about showing everyone, including Mrs. Wainwright, that he was more than what they saw. He wasn't just a kid from the wrong neighborhood with a smart kid label slapped on him. He was someone who had something real to offer. Something that couldn't be ignored any longer. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the test, Malik stood up and handed in his paper. He didn't look at Mrs. Wainwright as he didn't need to. He had already said what he needed to say. The rest was up to her. Walking out of the classroom, Malik felt a rush of pride. He had done it. He had stood up for himself in a way he never had before. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what happened with the test, nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the test dragged on, yet for Malik, they were filled with an unsettling anticipation. He had done it, he had stood up for himself in a way he never thought he would, but what would that mean for the future? Would Mrs. Wainwright take his challenge as a sign of defiance, or would she finally start seeing him for the person he truly was? More importantly, would anyone else begin to realize that Malik's quiet nature didn't mean weakness? That his reserved demeanor wasn't a reflection of his intelligence? A few days passed before Mrs. Wainwright called on him to stay after class. Malik's heart sank as he walked to her desk. He hadn't expected to be called out so soon. He tried to steady his breath, not knowing whether this would be a confrontation or a chance to show her the truth. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, and the class emptied out, leaving just Malik and Mrs. Wainwright alone. She didn't say anything at first, merely shuffled through some papers on her desk. Malik stood there, his hands clasped together, waiting for her to speak. "Malik," she finally said, not looking up. "I've been thinking about your behavior during the test." Malik's chest tightened. He couldn't tell if this was going to be an apology, a reprimand, or something worse. "You were disruptive, Malik. I understand you're a bright student, but you can't just call attention to yourself like that in the middle of a test." Malik's eyebrows furrowed. Was she seriously scolding him for standing up for himself? "I wasn't being disruptive," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I was just showing you that I'm capable. I don't need to hide in the back anymore." Mrs. Wainwright finally looked up at him, her eyes cold and assessing. "You're right. You are capable. But there's more to life than just being smart. You need to learn to navigate the world, Malik. There's a place for everything. Malik didn't know how to respond to that. It felt like she was treating him like a child who didn't know what he was doing. His frustration bubbled just beneath the surface, but he held it back. He had learned over the years that pushing back too hard rarely led to anything good. Instead, he gave her a simple nod, choosing not to argue. "Just, keep your head down, Malik," she said, sighing. "You have a lot of potential, but potential means nothing if you can't work within the system." The word stung. It felt like she was telling him to stay small, to stay quiet, to never show his true abilities in full force. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt the full weight of the invisible boundaries that had been placed on him, boundaries that he had never asked for but had always been there, lurking in the background. Malik walked out of her classroom that day feeling more conflicted than ever. He had expected the moment to be a turning point, a breakthrough, but instead, it had left him feeling more uncertain. What was he supposed to do now? Was it really enough to simply be smart, to have potential? Or did he need to learn how to bend, to fit into a system that had already made up its mind about him? As he walked home that day, the thought of his future weighed heavily on him. Was he just supposed to keep proving himself, over and over again, in a world that wasn't ready for someone like him? Was it even worth it? Or was he better off staying in the shadows, where he knew he was safe? The sound of footsteps behind him brought him back to reality. He turned to find his best friend, Jalen, catching up to him. "Hey, Malik. What's up? You look like you've got a lot on your mind," Jalen said, falling into step beside him. Malik managed a small smile. Jalen had been his friend since middle school. The two of them had been through everything together, from small-time pranks to helping each other get through the tough times at home. Jalen was the kind of friend who always had his back, no matter what. "I don't know, man," Malik replied, his voice tired. "Mrs. Wainwright, she's just, not getting it." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "Not getting what?" "That I'm more than just some quiet kid sitting in the back. That I'm not here to just get by. I've got something to offer, something real. And she doesn't even care." Jalen stopped walking for a moment, looking at Malik with a seriousness that was rare for him. "You know, man, you've been underestimating yourself, too. All this time, you've been playing it safe, hiding who you really are. But you can't just sit back and wait for people to notice. You gotta show them." Malik sighed. He knew Jalen was right, but it wasn't that simple. "It's not that easy. You don't get it, Jalen. You're good at sports. You're good at making friends. You don't have to fight to be seen. People just notice you." Jalen put a hand on Malik's shoulder. "And you don't think you deserve to be noticed? You think you're not worth being seen?" Malik looked down, suddenly feeling small again. "I don't know anymore. Listen, Malik, you're not alone in this. People around here might not see you, but there are people who will. All you gotta do is step out of that shadow. Start showing everyone what you can really do. You don't have to hide anymore." Malik looked up at Jalen, his best friend's words sinking in. Jalen was right. He couldn't keep hiding forever. He couldn't keep letting other people define who he was or what he could achieve. It was time to stop playing small, time to stop blending into the background. "I think I'm ready," Malik said quietly, almost to himself. Jalen grinned. "Good. 'Cause if you don't start showing everyone who you really are, they'll just keep walking all over you. Don't let them, Malik. Don't let them." Malik stood there for a moment, his heart beating in his chest. The weight of Jalen's words lingered with him as they continued walking home together. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges, but Malik was ready. He had to be. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows. There was a whole world out there waiting for him. And for the first time, Malik felt like he might actually be able to take it on. The weeks after Malik's conversation with Jalen were filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Malik knew something had to change, but he wasn't sure where to start. The pressure to prove himself weighed heavily on him, and although he tried to stay focused, the idea of finally revealing his potential felt like stepping onto a precipice. Could he really go through with it? Could he truly show the world who he was, despite all the doubts that clouded his mind? The turning point came one chilly afternoon in Mrs. Wainwright's class, during a routine quiz. Malik sat in his usual spot in the back of the room, his mind drifting to thoughts of the future, his future. He felt the pull of something deep within, a sense that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment to make his presence known. The bell rang, and Mrs. Wainwright started handing out the quiz papers. Malik's fingers trembled slightly as he took his paper, but he quickly steadied himself. This was just another quiz, another test of his skills, but there was something about today that felt different. It wasn't until Malik glanced over at his classmate, Isaac, that he realized the true weight of what was about to happen. Isaac was sitting next to him, a textbook open in front of him as he tried to cram in a few last-minute details. His face was flushed with stress, and his hand shook as he gripped the pen. Isaac was one of those students who always put on a show of confidence, but Malik knew better. He was just as nervous as everyone else. Malik's heart sank as he realized something: Isaac wasn't the only one struggling in this class. It seemed that every student in the room, with the exception of him, was visibly stressed, their anxiety bleeding into the atmosphere. And yet, despite their apparent distress, none of them could have known what Malik knew deep down. He could ace this quiz without breaking a sweat. He wasn't the one who needed to scramble for answers. It was everyone else. A familiar feeling of frustration swirled within him. He was better than this. He knew he was. He'd proven it time and time again in his head, but no one seemed to notice. Not Mrs. Wainwright. Not the students. And especially not Isaac, who constantly tried to outperform everyone. The tension in the room seemed to grow heavier, and Malik's chest tightened. Was this how his life would always be? Surrounded by people who would never see him for what he was. Someone who could walk into any room and solve any problem, yet always be overlooked. His thoughts were interrupted when Mrs. Wainwright started to circulate around the room, observing the student's progress. She paused by Isaac's desk, making sure he was on track, but Malik saw how the teacher's gaze darted over to him, as though she had already written him off as someone who wouldn't be a problem. Someone who wouldn't stand out. Malik could feel the weight of that expectation pressing down on him. It was always the same: people would look at him and assume he was just a regular kid. But no one knew the truth. No one knew what he was really capable of. And that, more than anything, made him feel invisible. Then, out of nowhere, the bell rang again. The quiz was over. Mrs. Wainwright called for the papers to be handed in, and Malik complied without a word, folding his paper neatly before sliding it across the desk. As he did, his eyes met hers for a split second. Her expression was unreadable. "Thank you, Malik," she said coolly, but there was no praise in her voice. Just indifference. And that was exactly how it always was. No one ever saw him for what he truly was, not his classmates, not his teachers, not even his own family. But that's when something snapped inside of him. Something that had been building for years, buried deep within the confines of his quiet nature. It was time to let go. Time to stop holding himself back. The moment Mrs. Wainwright took his paper, she did a double take, scanning the results. Her eyes widened slightly. Malik noticed the slight shift in her demeanor. Was it possible? Did she know? He hadn't even broken a sweat, and yet there it was, the unmistakable proof that he had once again outpaced everyone in the room. But the real shock came when she started looking at other students' papers. The moment she began grading, it became clear that none of the others had even come close to Malik's perfect score. "Wait," Mrs. Wainwright muttered under her breath, though loud enough for the students around her to hear. "This can't be right." Malik's stomach dropped as he watched her eyes flick back to him. "Malik, she said slowly, a mixture of disbelief and irritation in her voice. I don't understand. How did you get a perfect score without even trying? Malik stood up straight, his heart racing. He could feel all eyes on him now. The other students had stopped what they were doing, waiting to hear how he would respond. Even Isaac, the student who always tried to be the best, was staring at him, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Malik didn't respond immediately. He wanted to, but the weight of the moment was heavy. He didn't know how to explain to Mrs. Wainwright, or anyone else, that this wasn't about trying. It wasn't about the effort everyone else had to put in to get a passing grade. This was simply who he was. And for the first time, Malik allowed himself to feel the full weight of that truth. Because I'm not like everyone else, he said quietly, but firmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. It was a simple statement, but it held so much more. It was a declaration. A reminder to himself and to everyone else in the room that Malik was not just another student sitting in the back. He was someone with a gift that could no longer be hidden. The room was still for a moment, and then, Mrs. Wainwright spoke again, this time with a hint of skepticism in her tone. Malik, I want you to stay after class. We need to talk about this. The finality in her voice made it clear that this conversation was far from over. But Malik didn't feel fear anymore. Instead, he felt something new. Something powerful. He had made a statement, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't invisible. As the class ended, Malik's mind raced with the possibilities of what was to come. He had taken the first step. He had shown them his true potential. But the journey was just beginning. He was ready for whatever came next, because he knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning of his transformation. He was done being underestimated. Done hiding in the shadows. The world was about to see him for who he truly was. Malik sat at his desk, his mind racing. The bell had rung, signaling the end of class, but he didn't move. He stayed seated, waiting for Mrs. Wainwright to finish up with the other students. His heart was still pounding from the encounter earlier. What had just happened? Had he really said that out loud? I'm not like everyone else. The words echoed in his mind, and for the first time, Malik didn't feel like a fraud. He felt powerful. He felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward the life he had always imagined. As the classroom slowly emptied, Mrs. Wainwright walked over to him, her expression unreadable. She stood in front of his desk, looking down at him, and Malik met her gaze without flinching. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready for whatever came next. You've got some explaining to do, Malik, she said, her voice stern but not unkind. Malik sat up straighter, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. What do you mean? Mrs. Wainwright paused, clearly thinking. I've never seen anything like this. You aced that quiz, without even breaking a sweat. No one else even came close. I've been teaching for years, Malik, and I've never encountered a student like you before. You say you're not like everyone else, but, why haven't you shown this side of you before? The question hung in the air, and Malik took a deep breath. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. He had kept so much of himself hidden, kept himself quiet and reserved. But now, it was like a dam had broken, and all his thoughts and feelings wanted to pour out at once. I guess I've been scared, he said quietly, looking down at his hands. Scared of standing out, scared of being different. I've spent so much of my life trying to fit in, trying to be like everyone else, that I didn't realize I was hiding my true self. Mrs. Wainwright nodded thoughtfully. I see. And now? Now? I don't know, Malik replied, feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't in a long time. I don't want to hide anymore. I'm tired of pretending. I just want to be seen for who I really am. Mrs. Wainwright took a deep breath, her gaze softening. She pulled out the quiz he had turned in, the one with the perfect score. You're smart, Malik. I knew that. But you've been holding yourself back, and it's not just me who's noticed. Your classmates, they see it too. You have a gift, Malik. A gift that could change everything for you. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock. Malik was processing her words, trying to make sense of them. He hadn't thought about it that way. He had always assumed his gift was something to hide, something that made him different in a bad way. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe being different wasn't a curse. Maybe it was something to embrace. I guess I'm just afraid of what people will think, Malik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to be the kid who's always alone, the one who no one understands. Mrs. Wainwright sat down beside him, folding her arms across her chest. Malik, listen to me. There will always be people who don't understand you. There will always be those who will try to put you in a box, who will tell you that you're not enough, or that you're too much. But the only person who needs to believe in your potential is you. Malik looked up at her, feeling a flicker of hope in his chest. But what if I mess up? Everyone messes up, Mrs. Wainwright replied with a small smile. The important thing is that you learn from your mistakes. You grow from them. You don't let them define you. And you don't let fear stop you from doing what you're capable of. Malik nodded, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone truly believed in him, someone who saw his potential, not as a threat, but as something valuable. You're going to have to make some choices, Malik, Mrs. Wainwright said, her voice serious now. You can either keep playing it safe, keep hiding, or you can step up. You can show the world who you really are. It won't be easy, and it won't always be pretty, but I can tell you this, if you take that leap, you won't regret it. Malik felt the weight of her words settle deep into his soul. For the first time, he knew he had a choice. He could keep hiding, keep letting fear control him, or he could step into the light and show everyone exactly who he was. The thought was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. Maybe he wasn't meant to fit in. Maybe he was meant to stand out. The bell rang again, signaling the end of the day. Mrs. Wainwright stood up and handed Malik his quiz paper. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Malik, she said softly. But I believe in you. And I think you're ready. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, leaving Malik alone in the classroom. His heart was still pounding, but now it was a different kind of pulse, a feeling of excitement, of possibility. As he walked out of the room and into the hallway, Malik felt something shift within him. The world around him was still the same, but he was different. He wasn't the same kid who had walked into this school months ago. He wasn't the kid who hid in the back anymore. He wasn't the kid who let fear rule his life. No, Malik was someone new. Someone with a future that stretched far beyond the walls of this school. He could see it now, the possibilities, the opportunities that awaited him. And as he walked down the hallway toward the exit, he knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. He was ready to embrace his genius. Ready to show the world that he was more than just a student. He was someone who could change everything. It was time for Malik to stop hiding. It was time for him to shine. Malik woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The uncertainty that had weighed him down for so long had been replaced with a feeling of clarity. It was as though a fog had lifted, and now, for the first time in his life, he saw things in full detail. He wasn't just a student, he was someone with untapped potential, someone who could shape his future. As he sat up in bed, he stared out of his window at the rising sun, its light spilling across the horizon. Today wasn't just another day, it was the beginning of something new. Malik had made the decision the night before. He wasn't going to hide any longer. No more holding back. It was time to step into the light, to prove to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. The pressure that had once felt like a weight on his shoulders now felt like the fuel he needed to keep moving forward. It wasn't just about proving Mrs. Wainwright or his classmates wrong, it was about proving to himself that he had what it took to succeed. It was about believing in his own brilliance, despite the doubts he had carried for so long. Malik quickly got dressed, choosing an outfit that he felt confident in. A pair of dark jeans, a simple gray hoodie, and sneakers. Nothing flashy, but enough to make him feel comfortable and ready for the day. When he walked out the door, he felt a quiet determination in his every step. Today was going to be different. At school, the day was tense. Malik had already noticed the difference in how people were treating him. The whispers, the sideways glances, the faint looks of surprise as he walked through the hallways. Everyone knew what had happened in Mrs. Wainwright's class. Word traveled fast, and it didn't take long for Malik's quiet brilliance to become the topic of conversation. As he made his way to his locker, he caught the eyes of his friends, who had been mostly distant since the quiz. They were hesitant, unsure of how to approach him. Jalen, who had always been his closest friend, stepped forward first, his hands in his pockets. "Yo, Malik," Jalen said, a small grin tugging at his lips. "So, I hear you've been hiding some major talent, huh?" Malik smiled, the first real smile he'd had in days. "I guess I've been a little quiet about it." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "A little? Man, you aced that quiz. No one even came close. What's your secret?" Malik took a deep breath, his confidence growing as he looked his friend in the eye. "There's no secret, Jalen. I've just been holding back, scared of what people would think. But I'm done with that." Jalen nodded slowly, his expression serious for the first time. "Good for you, man. It's about time. Don't let anyone stop you. You've got something no one else has. Use it." Malik felt a rush of pride at his friend's words. For the first time, someone saw him for who he really was, and encouraged him to be that person. The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, and Malik made his way to Mrs. Wainwright's class, his mind racing with possibilities. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he was ready for whatever came his way. He couldn't wait to see how things would unfold. For the first time, he felt like he had control of his own story. As he walked into the classroom, he noticed that the usual group of students had gathered around, whispering to each other in hushed tones. The air felt different, charged with a kind of electricity. Malik couldn't help but wonder how much of this was because of him. Had he really made that much of an impression? Had his perfect score really shaken things up that much? Mrs. Wainwright stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the students as they settled into their seats. When she spotted Malik, her gaze softened, and she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. He gave her a confident smile in return, silently thanking her for giving him the space to embrace who he really was. She waited for the chatter to die down before speaking. "All right, class. I know yesterday's quiz was a lot, but I want you to know something. There's more to this class than just tests and grades. I want you all to learn how to think critically, how to approach problems from different angles. And Malik," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "you've already shown that you have the ability to think in ways that most people can't even imagine. I want to see more of that. I want to challenge you." The class went silent, and Malik could feel the weight of Mrs. Wainwright's words. She wasn't just talking to him, she was talking to everyone, encouraging them to think differently, to push their own boundaries. But Malik could feel her eyes on him as she said it, a silent acknowledgement that she was offering him a challenge. And Malik was ready for it. After class, Malik found himself standing in front of Mrs. Wainwright's desk, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. This was it, the moment when things would change for him. He knew that. But what he didn't know was what Mrs. Wainwright would say next. "Malik," she began, her voice low but serious, "I want to offer you a special opportunity. You've proven that you have potential far beyond what I expected. I'm assigning you a project, something that will push you even further. I want you to work on this, and I want you to bring your best work to the table. No holding back. You're ready for this. Malik's heart raced. A special project? He had never been given an opportunity like this before, and for a moment, he felt a surge of excitement flood through him. He was being trusted with something important, something that would require all of his abilities. This was his chance to prove to everyone, especially himself, that he was capable of greatness. I won't disappoint you, Malik said, his voice steady but filled with determination. Mrs. Wainwright smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Malik's chest swell with pride. I know you won't. As he walked out of her classroom, the weight of the day's events settled on him. This was the beginning of something big. Something that would change everything. And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt like he was standing on the edge of a new chapter, one where he didn't have to hide anymore. He was ready to embrace whatever challenge came his way. This was his moment. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. Malik's journey had just begun. The next few days flew by in a blur of anticipation. Malik couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Wainwright's special project. He had never been asked to do something like this before, something that would push him beyond the standard curriculum. It wasn't just an assignment, it was a test. A test not just of his intellect, but of his character, his resolve, and his willingness to embrace his full potential. Every time he passed a mirror, he caught a glimpse of someone he barely recognized. The boy who used to hide in the shadows was gone. In his place was someone determined, someone ready to break through the limits he'd placed on himself. And yet, despite his newfound confidence, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something big. What if he failed? What if he didn't meet Mrs. Wainwright's expectations? What if he was just another kid who thought he was special, but wasn't? As he sat in his room, surrounded by textbooks and papers, Malik tried to push those doubts aside. He had to focus. He had to prove to himself that he was more than the quiet kid in the back of the class. More than the kid who had been underestimated for far too long. His project? It wasn't just a typical school assignment. Mrs. Wainwright had given him a challenge that was unconventional. She wanted him to create something that combined logic, creativity, and critical thinking, something that would require both his genius and his unique perspective. She didn't just want him to answer a question, she wanted him to think outside the box, to approach the problem from a new angle. Malik knew this project would take time. He couldn't rush it. But that was what excited him. For the first time, he was allowed to explore. No one was telling him what to do, no one was giving him limits. He could make this his own. He could turn his vision into something real. A week later, Malik sat in the library, his project now in full swing. He had decided to create an interactive display, something that would challenge the way people view traditional learning. His idea was simple yet ambitious, a digital representation of a historical event that could be manipulated by the viewer in real time. It would allow them to make decisions that affected the outcome of the event, showing them just how interconnected history was with the choices people made. Malik had always been fascinated by history, but he had never seen a way to bring it to life in a way that was engaging for students. Most history lessons felt flat, disconnected from the people who lived them. This project, though, had the potential to change that. He was lost in his thoughts when Jalen walked up to his table, looking intrigued. "Yo, what's all this?" Jalen asked, eyeing the stack of papers and the laptop in front of Malik. Malik smiled, feeling the excitement bubble up inside him. "It's my project for Mrs. Wainwright. I'm creating a digital history lesson, like a game almost. You get to make choices and see how they impact history. It's kind of like turning history into an interactive experience." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dope. So, like, people can change stuff. Like, what if they choose to make Napoleon win at Waterloo?" Malik chuckled. "Exactly. They could change everything. It's about showing that history is full of choices, sometimes the smallest decision can lead to huge consequences. Jalen leaned in, clearly impressed. Man, this is some next-level stuff. You sure you're not a time traveler or something? 'Cause this idea is wild. Malik laughed, feeling a sense of pride. Nah, just a kid with a lot of ideas. But if it works out, it could change the way people learn. It's not just about memorizing dates and facts. It's about understanding how history was shaped by the people in it. Dude, that's crazy. I can't wait to see it. Mrs. Wainwright is gonna flip when she sees this, Jalen said, shaking his head in awe. Malik nodded. I hope so. But it's not about her being impressed. It's about showing myself that I can do this. That I can actually create something that matters. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Malik poured all his energy into the project, staying up late into the night, tweaking the design, refining the code, and adding layers of depth to the choices in the interactive simulation. Every time he felt like he was getting close to finishing, there was always something else to add, something that could make it even better. He had learned so much in the process, how to think critically, how to approach a project from multiple perspectives, and how to break a problem down into smaller, more manageable pieces. He realized that this was more than just a school project. It was a reflection of who he was becoming. The Malik who had once been afraid to show his brilliance was now someone who was creating, shaping, and building something that had the potential to change the way others thought. The day of the presentation arrived, and Malik felt a mix of excitement and nerves as he stood in front of the class. Mrs. Wainwright had given him the floor first, which only added to the pressure. As he set up his project, the room fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on him, and Malik could feel their curiosity and skepticism in the air. Would they understand what he was trying to do? Would they see the value in it? When the screen lit up and the interactive history simulation came to life, a collective gasp went through the room. Malik began to walk the class through the experience, explaining how each decision made in the game could change the course of history. He demonstrated how users could alter key events and see the ripple effects throughout time. As the students interacted with the simulation, they became visibly engaged. Some students chose to save the Titanic from sinking. Others tried to prevent the fall of the Roman Empire. There was a buzz in the room as the students realized the depth of the project and how much thought had gone into it. Malik watched, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. This was it, the moment he had been working toward. When the simulation ended, Mrs. Wainwright stood up, her face a mixture of shock and admiration. Malik, she said, her voice filled with awe, this is extraordinary. I have never seen anything like this before. You've taken an idea that no one else would have even considered and turned it into something groundbreaking. This is more than a project. It's a new way of thinking. Malik's heart swelled with pride as the class erupted into applause. The feeling was surreal. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged. He had done it. He had created something meaningful, something that not only showcased his abilities but challenged everyone around him to think differently. As Mrs. Wainwright called the class to order, she turned to Malik and said, "This is just the beginning for you. Don't let anyone, yourself included, tell you that you can't do more. The world is full of opportunities, and I have no doubt you'll take every one of them." Malik nodded, a quiet confidence growing within him. He was no longer the student who kept his head down. He was the student who had created something no one had ever expected. And this was only the start. As he walked out of the classroom, his head held high, Malik couldn't help but smile. He had taken the first step toward a future where he wasn't afraid to embrace who he was, and where he could achieve whatever he set his mind to. This was just the beginning. The days following Malik's groundbreaking presentation felt like a dream. His classmates were still buzzing with excitement, talking about the history project at lunch, in the halls, and between classes. Malik had gone from being the quiet kid in the back of the room to being the subject of conversation in every corner of the school. It was a strange feeling. On one hand, it was flattering to be the center of attention. He wasn't used to it. But on the other hand, it was intimidating. Malik was still adjusting to this new version of himself, and it felt like everyone was watching, waiting for him to make his next move. He wasn't sure he was ready for all of this. The first signs of something bigger started to appear during lunch that week. Malik was sitting with Jalen and his usual crew when a few of the more popular kids, the ones who had often ignored him before, walked over. Malik couldn't help but notice how their eyes were on him, how they seemed genuinely curious. "Yo, Malik," one of the boys, Josh, said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You're the kid with that history thing, right? That was insane. How'd you even come up with that?" Malik was caught off guard. He had always kept to himself, avoided being in the spotlight, but here he was, with people he didn't even know talking to him like he was someone important. Yeah, Malik said, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I just thought it would be cool to make history more interactive, you know. Something different than the usual textbook stuff." Josh nodded, impressed. "Man, that's real innovative. You got a lot of brains for a kid who doesn't say much." The others at the table chuckled, and for a moment, Malik felt like they were seeing him in a way they never had before. "Yeah, I didn't know you were into all that," another girl, Emily, added. "You should do something with that. Like, make it a website or something. People would actually use it." Malik's mind raced. The idea had crossed his mind. But it wasn't something he'd ever considered seriously. Creating a website, building something big enough to make a real impact, it was intimidating. Could he really do it? Could he push himself that far? Before he could respond, Jalen jumped in. "Yo, Malik's been thinking about taking it further. He's just figuring out the details." He gave Malik an encouraging smile, and Malik found himself smiling back, though it felt more out of habit than genuine confidence. "You should totally go for it," Emily said. "You've got something special, Malik. Don't waste it." For a few moments, Malik didn't know what to say. He was used to the idea of schoolwork, assignments, and grades, but this felt different. It was something bigger. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the attention or the challenge that came with it. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let this moment slip away. This was an opportunity. A big one. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop doubting himself. The next day, Malik spent his lunch break in the library, researching. He was determined to learn what it would take to bring his interactive history simulation to life on the web. He knew he would need a platform, some coding skills, and a lot of patience. He was no tech expert, but he wasn't afraid of a challenge. If this project was going to take off, he would have to put in the work to make it happen. As he dug into tutorials and learned the basics of web development, Malik's confidence began to grow. The more he learned, the more he realized that he was capable of doing this. He wasn't just the kid who could ace a test or create an impressive project for class. He was someone who could learn new skills, adapt, and push his boundaries. By the end of the week, Malik had built a basic prototype for his project, a simplified version of the simulation, running on a basic website template. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He could already imagine the possibilities, students all over the world interacting with history in a way that made it feel real, personal, and relevant to their lives. Later that day, Malik stayed after school to work on the project. He found Mrs. Wainwright in her classroom, grading papers. She looked up as he knocked on the doorframe. "Malik, what brings you here after school?" she asked, setting aside her work and offering him a warm smile. "I wanted to show you something," Malik said, his voice steady but filled with excitement. "I've been working on the project, and I think I've taken it a step further. I made it into a website." "Sort of." Mrs. Wainwright raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "A website? Show me." Malik stepped forward and pulled out his laptop, opening it to the simple site he'd created. It wasn't much, just a homepage with a few links, a simulation of a historical event that could be manipulated by clicking on it. But as he clicked through it for her, Mrs. Wainwright's expression went from curiosity to genuine awe. "This is incredible, Malik," she said after a moment. "You've turned your idea into something real. You've already learned how to build a website from scratch, and you've made the history lesson interactive in a way that will engage people like never before. I'm honestly blown away." Malik felt a rush of pride. He had done it. He had taken his concept and turned it into something tangible. And here was someone who truly appreciated what he had created. "I was thinking about expanding it, maybe getting more historical events on there. I've learned a lot about web development, but I'm still figuring some things out. I want to make it something people can use, like a tool for learning." Mrs. Wainwright nodded, clearly impressed. "You're thinking big, Malik. That's exactly the kind of vision you need. Don't stop here. Keep pushing, keep refining it. And when you're ready, I'll help you take it to the next level." Malik smiled, feeling like a weight had been lifted. For the first time, someone was actively supporting him in his dreams, someone who believed in him even when he wasn't sure he believed in himself. "Thank you, Mrs. Wainwright. That means a lot. You deserve it, Malik. I'm proud of you," she said, her voice sincere. "And remember, this is just the beginning. There's a whole world out there waiting for your ideas." As Malik left the classroom that day, a newfound sense of purpose filled him. He wasn't just a kid in the back of the class anymore. He was someone with a vision, someone whose ideas could make an impact. And this was just the beginning. The ripple effect had started. What started as a simple project had turned into something bigger, a vision, a dream, and a goal that could shape his future. Malik had learned the value of pushing through doubt, embracing the unknown, and finding the courage to take the first step towards something greater. And no one was going to stop him now. The weeks following the creation of the prototype were filled with both excitement and trepidation. Malik spent countless hours after school, refining his website, adding new features, and testing the user experience. He had learned more about coding and web development than he could have imagined, diving into tutorials and forums late at night, his mind always buzzing with new ideas. By the time the launch day arrived, he felt both ready and nervous. He had set up a meeting with Mrs. Wainwright to show her the final product, but in the back of his mind, Malik couldn't shake the thought, what if it's not enough? What if I've missed something important? He had created something special, but the fear of failure lingered. Would anyone really take it seriously? Would it make a difference, or would it just be another forgotten project? It was a Tuesday afternoon when Malik finally clicked the Publish button on his website. It was a simple action, but it felt like a monumental step. The website, interactivehistory.com, was live. He sat back, staring at the screen in disbelief. There it was, his idea, transformed into something real, something tangible. He immediately texted Jalen. "It's live. I did it." Jalen's response came within seconds. "Yo, I knew you'd do it. This is just the beginning, Malik. Can't wait to see where this goes." Malik smiled, feeling the weight of those words. He wasn't just proving something to his classmates or his teachers. He was proving something to himself. That afternoon, Malik found himself walking to Mrs. Wainwright's classroom, the same room where he had first presented his idea. His heart was racing in his chest as he prepared to show her what he had accomplished. He had worked so hard on this, but now it was time for the ultimate test. When he stepped inside, she looked up from her desk, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Malik. You're here. What's the big news?" she asked, clearly excited. Malik set down his laptop in front of her. "It's done. The website. I've launched it. It's live." Mrs. Wainwright's face broke into a smile, and she immediately leaned forward, eager to see what Malik had done. He showed her the homepage, where users could choose from various historical events and make decisions that altered the course of history. There were buttons for simulations of the American Revolution, the fall of Rome, and even the space race. The design was sleek, modern, and user-friendly, with vibrant visuals and interactive features. "This is incredible, Malik," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "It's more than I could have imagined. You've made history come to life in a way that's never been done before. You've created something people are going to want to use." Malik could feel the pride swelling inside him. Mrs. Wainwright's approval meant everything. She had believed in him from the beginning, and now, seeing the finished project, her praise only reinforced his confidence. "Thank you, Mrs. Wainwright," he said, his voice a little shaky with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without your support." She smiled warmly. "You did this, Malik. You took your vision and made it real. And trust me, this is just the beginning. Don't be surprised if your project catches the eye of people beyond our school. You've created something special." Malik's heart skipped a beat. People beyond our school. The thought hadn't even crossed his mind. It was one thing to have a successful project in class, but the idea that his work might reach others was both thrilling and intimidating. What if people didn't like it? What if no one cared? Do you think? What if it doesn't take off? Malik asked, his voice betraying his doubt. Mrs. Wainwright's expression softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've already succeeded, Malik. The moment you took a leap and put your work out there, you succeeded. It doesn't matter how many people see it, it matters that you believed in yourself enough to share it. And now, it's time to see where it goes." As the days passed, Malik's website began to gain traction. It started small, his friends and classmates shared it with their families, and some teachers even incorporated it into their lessons. Malik's social media notifications buzzed with comments from people praising the concept and sharing their thoughts on how they could use it in their classrooms. It wasn't long before Mrs. Wainwright suggested they organize a demonstration for the school board. Malik was both excited and terrified at the thought. A room full of educators, experts, and administrators who would be evaluating his work, it felt like the ultimate test. But Mrs. Wainwright's unwavering belief in him gave him the courage to push forward. The presentation day arrived, and Malik stood before a room of stern-looking teachers, school administrators, and even a few local media representatives. Mrs. Wainwright introduced him with a few words of praise, and then it was Malik's turn to take the stage. The moment he stepped up to the podium, the nervousness hit him like a wave. He was used to being the quiet kid, the one who didn't stand out. But now, he was about to speak to some of the most influential people in education. He took a deep breath, clicked through the slides, and began his presentation. As he explained the interactive elements of his website and demonstrated how it allowed students to explore different historical events, he could see the curiosity growing in the room. People were leaning forward, nodding in approval, and whispering to one another. He spoke about the possibilities for expanding the project and integrating it into schools across the country. By the time he finished, the room was silent, and Malik found himself holding his breath, waiting for the first comment. Finally, one of the administrators spoke. "This is exceptional," she said, her tone serious but approving. "You've managed to take a dry subject like history and make it come alive for students in a way I haven't seen before. I think this could be a game changer for education." Another board member chimed in. "You've thought of everything: interactivity, design, accessibility. We're going to take this project to the next level." Malik's heart soared. The validation he'd craved, both from his peers and the education professionals, was finally here. His work was being taken seriously. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back of the room anymore. He was the kid who had turned an idea into something real, something that could impact the way people learned. After the meeting, Malik couldn't stop smiling. It was more than he'd ever expected. The support from his school, from Mrs. Wainwright, and now from the board members meant everything to him. As he walked out of the building that afternoon, he felt a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. For the first time, Malik was no longer just reacting to the world around him. He was creating it. And the best part? This was just the beginning. With his website gaining attention and support, Malik knew that the world was full of endless possibilities. He had proven to himself that he could achieve anything he set his mind to. And now, with each new opportunity, he was ready to take on whatever came next. It wasn't just about history anymore, it was about his own future, and Malik was more determined than ever to make it a future that was his to shape. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik's success with InteractiveHistory.com had opened doors he never thought possible. His project had received praise from teachers, administrators, and even local media. The excitement surrounding the website was growing, and suddenly, Malik was being invited to speak at conferences and events. It was surreal, like he had stepped into a new reality where his ideas mattered, where people wanted to hear what he had to say. But with this newfound success came an overwhelming realization: he was no longer just a student working on a class project. He was a young entrepreneur with a vision, and the weight of that responsibility began to sink in. As the days went by, Malik found himself struggling to balance school, the growing demand for his project, and his own self-doubt. He was no longer just building a website for a history class assignment. People were beginning to see him as someone who could change the way education worked. And that scared him. One afternoon, Malik sat in the library after school, staring at his laptop. The website had gotten more traffic than he had ever anticipated. Teachers from other schools had reached out, asking how they could use his site in their classrooms. Some even wanted to help him develop new features. Malik had never been the type to shy away from hard work, but the pressure of managing it all was starting to get to him. As he scrolled through his inbox, he came across a message from a well-known educational technology company. They had seen his website and wanted to discuss a potential partnership. They were offering funding and resources to help him take his project to the next level, but there was a catch. They wanted him to join their team as a full-time developer, putting his website under their control in exchange for their help. Malik stared at the email for a long time. This was everything he had ever dreamed of: support, funding, a chance to make his project even bigger than he had ever imagined. But there was a voice in the back of his mind asking, what would that cost him? He had worked so hard to create something that was truly his, something he could control. The idea of handing that over to a corporation felt like a betrayal of his vision. On the other hand, the opportunity could provide him with the resources he needed to make his project accessible to students everywhere. It was a chance to make a real impact on education. Malik's phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Jalen. "Yo, what's up? You look deep in thought. Everything good?" Malik stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "I just got an offer from a tech company. They want to partner with me and fund my project. I'm not sure what to do." A few moments later, Jalen replied. "That's huge, bro. But you gotta think about it. Are they offering you what you want? Or what they want? If they're gonna change your vision, is it worth it?" Malik sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Exactly. I don't want to lose control of my project, but I also don't want to turn down a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Well, you've always been about doing things your way. Just don't let anyone take that from you. Maybe there's another way. You know, a way that doesn't change your vision." Malik smiled at Jalen's words. His friend was right. He had built this project on his own terms, and it had come this far because of his hard work and dedication. But the opportunity was so tempting. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a chance to change the educational system. Maybe Jalen was right, there had to be a way to make it work without compromising his vision. The next day, Malik sat down with Mrs. Wainwright in her classroom after school. He knew he needed advice from someone who had always supported him, someone who had been there since the beginning. "Mrs. Wainwright," Malik began, his voice uncertain, "I've gotten an offer from a tech company. They want to partner with me and fund my project, but I'm not sure if I should take it. I'm worried I'll lose control of everything I've worked for." Mrs. Wainwright studied him for a moment before speaking. "Malik, this is a big decision, and I understand why you're conflicted. But let me ask you something, why did you start this project in the first place?" Malik thought for a moment. "Because I wanted to make history interesting, to get people excited about learning. I wanted to give students something real, something they could connect with. And I wanted to do it my way, without anyone telling me how to do it." Mrs. Wainwright nodded. "Exactly. And that's your strength, your vision. But sometimes, the road to success isn't straight. It's filled with challenges, decisions that test your resolve. The question you need to ask yourself is, what do you want this project to be? If the partnership will help you achieve that, and still allow you to stay true to your vision, then it might be worth considering." Malik swallowed hard. "But what if I can't stay true to my vision? What if they change it to fit their agenda? Then you have to ask yourself if you're willing to compromise for the greater good. Is your vision important enough to stand firm, or is the chance to reach a wider audience worth bending a little? It's a tough decision, Malik. But trust yourself. You know what's best for your project." Later that night, Malik sat in front of his laptop again, staring at the email. The words that had once seemed like an opportunity now felt more like a dilemma. He didn't want to lose control of the project that had meant so much to him, but he also knew that this could be the break he had been waiting for. His mind flashed back to all the moments that had led him here, the nights spent coding, the presentations, the teachers and friends who had supported him. He remembered the feeling he had when he first clicked the "Publish" button. He had created something of his own, something that was uniquely him. Malik wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. He took a deep breath and composed his response, his fingers steady as he typed. "Thank you for your generous offer. After careful consideration, I have decided to continue developing my project independently. I believe that by staying true to my vision, I can create something truly impactful. However, I appreciate your interest in my work and would be open to discussing future collaboration possibilities that align with my mission." When he hit send, Malik felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had made his decision. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. He wasn't going to let anyone take his vision away. Not now, not ever. The next chapter was his to write. Malik's decision to turn down the partnership offer from the tech company wasn't easy, but as the days passed, he began to feel more certain that it had been the right one. His project, interactivehistory.com, was thriving on its own terms. Teachers from other schools were reaching out, offering advice, and students were showing a growing interest in his platform. There was a sense of excitement in the air that he couldn't deny. But as the success of his project grew, so did the challenges. Malik quickly realized that managing the growing demand was harder than he had anticipated. He was still balancing schoolwork with his website, and every new inquiry or request for his platform felt like another weight on his shoulders. It was a Friday afternoon when Malik first encountered a significant obstacle. He had just finished another presentation at a local school district and his phone buzzed with a text from Jalen. "Bro, are you okay? You've been off the radar for a couple of days now." Malik ran his fingers over his eyes, feeling the pressure building. The excitement of launching his website had started to fade, replaced by the overwhelming responsibility of keeping it going. He knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. The project was taking up all his time, and his grades in school were starting to slip. "I'm fine," he typed back, even though he knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just a lot going on. You know how it is." But Jalen wasn't buying it. Nah, man. I can tell something's off. You're not yourself. If you need to talk, I'm here. Malik stared at the text for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, he hadn't been himself lately. His focus was split between school, his website, and all the people reaching out to him for help. There were emails from teachers, developers offering to collaborate, and even students asking for advice. He felt like he was drowning in expectations. The following Monday, Malik found himself in Mrs. Wainwright's classroom after school, waiting for her to finish grading papers. He hadn't told anyone about how much stress he was under, but he knew he needed advice. She had been a constant source of support throughout his project, and if anyone could help him figure out what to do, it was her. "Malik," she said, glancing up as he sat down at the desk across from hers, "what's on your mind? You've been quieter than usual." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's just, there's so much going on. The website's growing, people are interested, but I feel like I'm failing everything else. School's slipping, and I can't keep up with all the emails and requests. I don't know if I'm cut out for this." Mrs. Wainwright leaned back in her chair, considering him carefully. "I understand, Malik. You've taken on a lot. But I want you to remember something, you don't have to do this alone. You've already accomplished so much, but there's no shame in asking for help. This is bigger than just one person. It's okay to lean on others." Malik frowned. "But it feels like if I let go of any of it, everything will fall apart. This project, it's my dream. I've worked so hard for this." She smiled gently. "I know, Malik. I've seen you pour your heart into it. But sometimes, dreams need more than just hard work. They need a team. You can't do everything on your own." As Malik walked home that afternoon, Mrs. Wainwright's words echoed in his mind. A team. The idea had never crossed his mind. For so long, it had been his project, his vision. But maybe she was right, maybe he couldn't do it all alone. That evening, Malik sat down with his laptop again, scanning through the endless stream of emails and messages. He saw requests from several teachers who wanted him to add new features to the website, including a chat function and more interactive timelines. There were suggestions from developers who wanted to collaborate, and there were also inquiries from potential sponsors looking to invest in the platform. "I can't do this alone," he thought again. Malik decided to reach out to a few people. First, he called Jalen. "Yo, man, I think I need help with the project. It's gotten way bigger than I expected, and I can't keep up with everything." Jalen responded almost immediately. "I told you, bro. You can't do it all by yourself. I've got your back. Let me know how I can help." Malik smiled, relieved to have Jalen's support. But Jalen wasn't the only one who could help. He had always admired the way his classmate, Sarah, handled coding and design. She had been instrumental in helping him with small tasks in the past, and Malik knew that if anyone could help him manage the technical side of things, it was Sarah. He sent her a message, "Hey, Sarah, I need some help with the website. It's grown a lot, and I could really use someone who knows what they're doing with design and coding. Are you interested?" Her response came quickly, "I'm in. Let's make this thing even better." With Sarah and Jalen on board, Malik began to feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. He could delegate tasks and focus on what mattered most, keeping his vision intact while expanding the project. But it wasn't just about the technical work, it was about building something that could have a lasting impact. Malik realized that he needed to take the next step, finding investors who believed in his vision and were willing to support it. He had always feared that seeking financial backing might mean losing control, but with the right team by his side, Malik felt more confident than ever. He started researching potential investors, companies focused on education, technology, and youth development. Malik knew he had to find people who shared his passion for revolutionizing the way students learned history. He couldn't afford to let fear dictate his decisions anymore. 1 week later, Malik found himself sitting across from two investors at a local cafe, explaining his vision. He wasn't nervous this time, he had a plan, he had a team, and he believed in what he was doing. The investors were impressed by Malik's passion and the way he had grown the project on his own, but they wanted to see more. They wanted to know how Malik planned to scale interactivehistory.com, how he would ensure it reached students beyond his local area, and how he would continue to innovate. It was a tough conversation, but Malik had a clear answer for each question. With the help of Sarah and Jalen, he had a roadmap for the future, a plan for adding new features, expanding the website's reach, and ensuring it remained true to his vision. By the end of the meeting, the investors were ready to make an offer. They saw the potential in Malik's project, and they wanted to help him bring it to the next level. But they also made it clear that the partnership would require compromise. Malik would have to give up some control, but it was a small price to pay for the resources and backing that would allow his project to grow exponentially. As he left the cafe, Malik felt a mix of emotions. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. His dream was becoming a reality, and with the right support, he was ready to take on whatever came next. He wasn't just building a website anymore, he was building a legacy. The weeks following the meeting with the investors were a whirlwind of activity. Malik found himself torn between the promise of expanded resources and the pressure to relinquish control. The deal was a significant step forward for his project, but every part of him felt hesitant. He had worked so hard to create something unique, something that represented his vision, and now, he was about to allow others to have a say in its future. With Sarah and Jalen now fully integrated into the team, Malik spent his days balancing school, project development, and meetings with potential investors. The weight of responsibility felt heavier with each passing day, but he was no longer carrying it alone. His friends and new partners supported him in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Sarah was a wizard with the website's back-end, ensuring it was as efficient as it was user-friendly. Jalen, with his natural charisma, had begun reaching out to schools, encouraging teachers to implement interactivehistory.com into their classrooms. Malik's role had shifted. He was no longer just a developer or a student. He was the CEO of a startup, an unlikely title for a 16-year-old, but one that felt more natural as the days passed. He had to make decisions not just for his website, but for the future of education itself. It was a rainy afternoon when Malik's phone buzzed with an email notification. He had been in back-to-back meetings with the investors, discussing their vision for the website's future. The message in his inbox was from Claire, one of the key investors. "Malik, we've discussed your ideas in detail, and we're ready to move forward with the deal. However, we'd like to discuss a few adjustments regarding the control and direction of the project. We believe these changes will help you scale quickly and reach a larger audience." Malik frowned as he opened the email further. The adjustments weren't drastic, but they were enough to make him uncomfortable. They wanted a larger say in the overall design of the site, and they suggested incorporating more standardized elements that could make the platform easier for large school districts to adopt. This, they argued, would increase its appeal. It didn't sit well with Malik. The idea of losing some of the individuality that made interactivehistory.com special felt like a betrayal to everything he had worked for. He read through the email several times, trying to find a way to make their suggestions work while maintaining the integrity of his vision. There had to be a balance, a way to scale without sacrificing the heart of the project. But was he ready to take that risk? The following evening, Malik invited Sarah and Jalen over to his house to discuss the email. He couldn't make this decision alone, he needed their input. He sat them down in the living room, his mind racing with possibilities. "I got an email from the investors," Malik began, his voice tense. "They're ready to move forward, but they want to change the direction of the website a bit. They want us to make it more standardized, more like other educational platforms. They think it'll help us grow faster." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Standardized? That's kind of the opposite of what you've been trying to do, isn't it? Malik nodded. Exactly. They think it'll make the platform easier for schools to adopt. But I don't want to lose the unique, interactive elements that make this website different. Jalen leaned back in his chair. You can't just sell out to make a quick buck. If you do that, it's not even your project anymore. But at the same time, you can't keep it small just because you're afraid of losing control. Malik stared at the floor, wrestling with his thoughts. I know. But the growth is huge, and the resources they're offering could really take this to the next level. It's just, I made this. And I don't want anyone else telling me how to run it. I get it, Sarah said, her tone thoughtful. But you're not in this alone anymore. You've got a team now. You've got us. And maybe, just maybe, you can find a way to scale it while keeping the soul of what you've created. You just have to be clear about your vision. That night, Malik sat at his desk, his laptop open in front of him. The weight of the decision pressed down on him harder than ever. His project had the potential to change the way students interacted with history. But that change would come with a price. He thought about the kids at his old school, the ones who struggled with traditional learning. He thought about the teachers who had reached out to him, grateful for a resource that made history come alive. He thought about his own experiences, how he had learned best when he could interact with the material, when it was personal and engaging. Malik didn't want to lose that. He couldn't. He typed out a response to Claire's email. Thank you for the offer and your continued support. I'm excited about the potential we have to scale interactivehistory.com, but I want to make it clear that my vision for the project hasn't changed. While I understand the need for growth and standardization, I believe that the heart of the project, the interactive and personalized learning experiences, should remain at the core. I'm open to discussing ways to streamline the platform, but it's crucial that we maintain the unique qualities that make it stand out. He hit send, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had stood his ground, but he was also open to compromise. This was his project, but he knew that to grow, he needed to find a way to blend his vision with the investor's goals. The next day, Claire responded quickly. Thank you for your thoughts, Malik. We completely understand your concerns, and we appreciate your passion for maintaining the unique qualities of interactivehistory.com. Let's set up a meeting to discuss how we can move forward in a way that benefits both parties. We're excited to see what we can accomplish together. It wasn't the all-or-nothing response Malik had feared. The investors were willing to work with him, to find a compromise that would allow the platform to grow without losing its essence. It was a relief, but it also reminded Malik that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. He would have to navigate the complexities of growth, balancing his dream with the demands of others. But for the first time in a while, Malik felt confident that he was on the right path. He didn't have to sacrifice his vision to make a difference. And as long as he stayed true to himself, there was no telling how far interactivehistory.com could go. The journey was just beginning. After the meeting with the investors, things moved fast. Malik found himself in uncharted territory. He had committed to scaling interactivehistory.com, but the path ahead wasn't as straightforward as he had imagined. The negotiations had been intense, and though they had agreed on certain compromises, Malik still felt the weight of the decisions he was making. But with the backing of Sarah, Jalen, and his newfound investors, the pieces were slowly falling into place. The platform was getting more polished, the backend more robust, and the features that Malik had envisioned began to take shape. Still, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a fine line between growth and losing what made interactivehistory.com special in the first place. It was late one evening, and Malik was sitting at his desk, his screen filled with lines of code. The website was now officially taking off. Teachers from all over the country were signing up to use it in their classrooms, and the influx of users made Malik realize just how big his project could become. The numbers were growing exponentially, but the more people used the site, the more pressure Malik felt to improve it. Sarah, Malik said, glancing up at her across the room. She was hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "What's up?" she asked, not looking away from her screen. "I'm starting to feel overwhelmed," Malik confessed. "The more this thing grows, the more it feels like it's slipping out of my control. I don't want to lose the magic of what we built. I've always thought that if it got too big, it would lose what makes it ours." Sarah paused and leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "I get it. It's hard, especially when you've been working on this project for so long. But we're in this together, Malik. You don't have to carry it all. We've got a great team, and we're building something bigger than just you." Her words felt like a lifeline. He knew she was right, he didn't have to carry everything alone. But a part of him still worried that with every new feature, every new user, he was one step closer to losing the heart of his idea. "I don't know," Malik murmured, staring at his screen. "I guess I'm afraid that once it's out there, it's not going to be mine anymore." "That's the thing," Sarah said. "It never really was just yours, Malik. This project is something that you've built, yes, but the impact it has will be bigger than just you. You're creating something that's going to help people, students, teachers, communities. Don't let your fear of losing control stop that from happening." Malik sat in silence for a moment, processing Sarah's words. Maybe it wasn't about control, it was about purpose. His goal was never just to have a successful website, it was to make an impact, to change the way students engaged with history. He knew that the platform's potential was far greater than what he could achieve alone. This wasn't about losing ownership, it was about creating something that could grow and evolve, something that would continue to help students long after he had moved on to the next challenge. The next morning, Malik met with the investors again, this time to discuss the next steps. The meeting was tense at first. Claire, one of the key investors, started by outlining the plans for scaling. They had brought in a marketing team, they were working on a mobile version of the website, and they wanted to expand the curriculum to include more subjects beyond history. Malik listened intently, but his mind kept drifting back to his core vision. He had always believed in the power of history to teach critical thinking and empathy. But was this still the direction he wanted to take? Could he really expand to other subjects without diluting the platform's original message? "We're excited about these changes," Claire said, breaking Malik's thoughts. "But we also understand that your vision is important. We want to make sure we stay aligned with your goals as we scale. What do you think about expanding beyond history? Do you think there's potential in branching out?" Malik took a deep breath before responding. "I think there's potential, but it's not something I want to rush into. History is at the heart of this project, and I don't want to water that down. I want to make sure that whatever we expand into, it's done with the same level of passion and focus. If we're going to do it, we need to do it right." Claire nodded, looking at Malik with a mix of respect and understanding. "That's fair. We don't want to change the essence of what makes the platform unique. But we do think there's room to grow." Malik felt a sense of relief. The investors weren't trying to force a direction that felt wrong. They were willing to work with him, to find a way to scale the project without losing its heart. That's all he had ever wanted. As the months went by, Malik's life seemed to accelerate at an overwhelming pace. The website's user base grew quickly, and soon, schools across the country were adopting interactivehistory.com. Teachers were sending him messages, telling him how their students were engaged with the lessons, how they were seeing improvements in their understanding of history. Malik couldn't help but smile whenever he read those messages. The feedback kept him going, even on the days when he felt exhausted. One evening, Jalen texted him, "Bro, I think we're really making a difference. I talked to a teacher today, and she said her students are learning more and faster because of this site. You've changed the game." Malik stared at the text for a moment, feeling a surge of pride. "We've changed the game," he corrected, typing back. He wasn't alone in this. It had always been about the team, Sarah, Jalen, the investors, the teachers, and, of course, the students. Together, they had created something powerful, something that could transform education. But just as Malik was starting to feel like things were finally coming together, a new wave of challenges emerged. With the platform expanding, he began to encounter criticism from some educators who felt that the website was too focused on technology and not enough on traditional teaching methods. There were concerns about screen time, about whether the platform was a quick fix that would eventually lead to disengagement. Malik wasn't sure how to respond. He had always believed that technology could enhance education, not replace it. But now, he found himself caught in a debate he hadn't expected. As he sat at his desk late one night, pondering the future of his project, he realized that this was part of the process. The challenges were inevitable. The key was to stay true to his vision while being open to constructive feedback. Just then, his phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Wainwright, his former teacher. "Malik, I saw some of the new updates on the site. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You're doing something special. Keep pushing." Those words meant the world to Malik. As the platform grew, as the pressure mounted, he remembered why he had started in the first place: to help students, to make learning more engaging, to give them the tools they needed to succeed. It was never just about the website. It was about changing the way the world learned. And he was only just getting started. As the months flew by, Malik found himself facing a dilemma that no one had prepared him for. The growth of InteractiveHistory.com was beyond anything he had ever anticipated. But with that success came intense pressure, not just from the investors and the growing user base, but also from his own expectations of himself. While Malik had been excited about the potential of his platform, he now realized that scaling a business required more than just passion and a great idea. There were operational challenges, technical problems, and most difficult of all, the weight of making decisions that affected the lives of hundreds of thousands of students. The stakes had never been higher. One particularly stressful afternoon, Malik sat in a meeting with his team, Sarah, Jalen, and a couple of new hires they had brought on to help with customer service and marketing. The conversation was tense, as they had hit a major snag with the platform. A recent update had caused a bug that prevented teachers from accessing lesson plans. It was a simple fix, but the issue had gone viral in the community, and the emails were flooding in. "How long do you think this will take to fix?" Malik asked, his voice betraying his growing frustration. Sarah, who was now heading up the technical side of things, furrowed her brow as she looked through the code. "I think we can have it patched up in a couple of days, but the real problem is the PR hit we're taking. It's hard to convince people that we're a reliable platform when this happens." Jalen chimed in, trying to ease the tension. "Let's focus on fixing the issue first. We can always work on damage control afterward. We've been through worse, right?" But Malik was unconvinced. "We can't afford to let this go on any longer. If we want to keep growing, we have to be able to handle this kind of stuff without it derailing us." As the meeting broke up, Malik found himself pacing around the office, his mind racing. He was used to the pressure of exams, used to the weight of schoolwork. But this? This was something entirely different. The responsibility of running a company, of making decisions that affected so many people, was exhausting. Malik's phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a text from Claire, one of the investors. "Malik, I know things are hectic right now, but we need to have a discussion about the future of the platform. We've been seeing some feedback from schools about the direction of InteractiveHistory.com. They're worried that the platform is starting to feel too corporate. We want to ensure we're still staying true to your original vision. Let's talk soon." Malik's heart sank. The last thing he wanted was to disappoint his investors, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled in different directions. Every decision seemed to add to the growing weight on his shoulders. Later that night, Malik met with Sarah and Jalen to discuss the situation. "I got a text from Claire," Malik said, rubbing his temples. They're starting to get concerned that we're losing touch with the core of what made this project special. They want to make sure we're staying authentic, but I don't know how to do that with everything else going on. Jalen leaned forward. You're stuck in a hard place, man. But that's why you have us. We're all in this together. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to slow down, take a breath, and think things through. You don't have to do it all at once. Sarah nodded in agreement. We've all come a long way. And you've done more than anyone ever expected. But if you want to keep this going, we need to focus on the people who matter most, your vision, your team, and the students you're trying to help. Don't lose sight of that. Malik looked at his friends, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over him. They were right. He didn't have to do it all on his own, and he didn't have to make every decision in a rush. It was okay to take a step back and reassess. What had made InteractiveHistory.com special wasn't the technology or the marketing, it was the way it connected with people. The more he focused on staying true to that, the more success would follow. The next morning, Malik sent an email to Claire, requesting a meeting to discuss the feedback from the schools and the future of the platform. He didn't know what the answer would be, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't compromise on the core principles that had made this project meaningful to him. As he hit send, Malik felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The next chapter of InteractiveHistory.com was unfolding, but it was still his story to tell. He would find a way to navigate these new challenges without losing what mattered most. A few days later, Malik sat down with Claire and the rest of the investor team to discuss the feedback. The meeting was long, but productive. Claire was understanding and offered suggestions for how they could adapt the platform to maintain its authenticity while still appealing to schools and larger educational organizations. We don't want to change the heart of what you've created, Claire said. But we do need to make it more adaptable to different educational environments. I think we can find a way to balance the two. Malik nodded thoughtfully. I want to make sure that whatever changes we make, we're still connecting with students in a meaningful way. I don't want to lose that. Of course, Claire responded. We'll work with you every step of the way. The conversation with the investors gave Malik the clarity he needed. He didn't have to choose between staying true to his vision and growing the platform. He could do both. But it would take careful planning and a willingness to adapt. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Malik knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to lose sight of the purpose that had started it all. As the weeks went by, Malik found a new rhythm. He and his team worked tirelessly to fix bugs, improve user experience, and refine the platform's messaging. They also began to incorporate more interactive tools, including gamified learning features and community-driven history projects that encouraged students to collaborate with others around the world. In the face of mounting challenges, Malik realized that it wasn't about making everything perfect. It was about continuing to move forward, to learn from mistakes, and to always stay true to the mission that had sparked his journey in the first place. And with every success, every small victory, Malik found himself more confident that he could build something that would not only last, but change the world of education forever. The next phase was coming. As InteractiveHistory.com began to stabilize, Malik found himself increasingly drawn into the broader implications of his platform. It wasn't just about coding or marketing anymore. It was about shaping the future of education, about making history come alive for students who would never have been excited by it otherwise. This was the turning point, the realization that his platform was more than just a website or a business. It was a movement. Still, even with that newfound clarity, Malik couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things were happening too fast. He'd gone from a passionate college student with a dream to a business owner responsible for hundreds of thousands of users. The pressure, while manageable, had become a constant companion. One evening, after a particularly draining day of meetings and updates with his team, Malik found himself walking through the city streets, seeking a break from his thoughts. He hadn't realized how much he needed this moment of quiet until he was surrounded by the familiar hum of city life. The tall buildings, the distant chatter of commuters, and the subtle hustle of the streets felt like a breath of fresh air. He didn't stop to think about anything, he just walked. As he reached a park, Malik sat down on a bench, watching the sunset. The soft hues of orange and pink painted the sky, and for a moment, everything felt still. But that stillness was soon interrupted by a text notification from Jalen. "Hey man, you good? You've been quiet the last couple of days. Let's grab some food, I think you need a break." Malik smiled to himself. Jalen always knew when to reach out. He typed back, "Yeah, I think I need a break. Let's do it." Within an hour, Malik and Jalen were sitting at their favorite restaurant, an old-school diner that had been a staple of their late-night hangouts throughout college. The food was greasy, the conversations were always easy, and for Malik, it was a reminder of a simpler time. "You seem off, man," Jalen said, picking at his fries. "You're not yourself lately. Is it the business stuff getting to you?" Malik sighed. "It's more than that. I've been thinking about what we're doing here. Interactivehistory.com, at first, it felt like I was just doing something I loved, but now I see that it's bigger than me. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I wanted to create something that would change education for the better, something that would reach kids who otherwise wouldn't care about history. But now I feel like I'm losing sight of that. There's so much pressure to grow, to scale, to make the right decisions. It's hard to balance that with staying true to what I set out to do in the first place." Jalen nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I get it. The business side of things can be overwhelming, but you can't forget the reason you started this in the first place. You've always had the heart of a teacher, Malik. If you keep that in mind, the rest will follow." Malik looked up at his friend, grateful for his perspective. "You're right. I started this to make history more engaging, to give students a new way of learning. I can't let the business side take over that mission. I just need to remember why I started." The conversation with Jalen wasn't a magic fix, but it was a turning point for Malik. He realized that, while he couldn't ignore the business side, he didn't have to sacrifice his passion for teaching or his vision for the platform. The key was balance, and staying focused on the students who were benefiting from interactivehistory.com. The next day, Malik met with Sarah and the team to discuss a new direction. The recent conversations had made him realize that, despite the challenges and distractions, they had built something special. He needed to refocus on what mattered most, providing value for educators and students. "I've been thinking a lot about our next steps," Malik said, addressing the room. "We've gotten so caught up in scaling and expanding that I feel like we've forgotten why we started. We need to go back to basics. We need to reconnect with the students and teachers who are already using our platform and get their feedback. That's what matters most." Sarah nodded. "You're right. We can't get ahead of ourselves. We've built something that's helping kids. Let's focus on making it even better for them." Jalen added, "We can work on expanding later, but let's first make sure we're doing everything we can to make the platform the best it can be for our users." The team spent the next few weeks reviewing the feedback they had received from teachers and students. They fine-tuned the site's features, working to make it even more intuitive and engaging. They also reached out to educators to better understand how interactivehistory.com was being used in classrooms across the country. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but there were still areas to improve. Teachers wanted more interactive features, and students wanted a more gamified learning experience. But through it all, the feedback reinforced something important: they were on the right track. The platform was changing the way students saw history, and that was the foundation they had to build upon. As the months passed, Malik became more comfortable with his role as both a CEO and an advocate for education. He still struggled with the pressures of running a business, but he had found a way to balance his passion for history with the demands of growth. And while there were still challenges, both technical and emotional, he was no longer overwhelmed by them. Malik knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more obstacles, more tough decisions, and more moments of doubt. But he had learned something crucial: as long as he stayed true to his vision and continued to focus on what mattered most, educating and inspiring students, he would find a way to succeed. InteractiveHistory.com wasn't just a business. It was a movement. And Malik was determined to see it through, no matter the challenges. As he sat back in his office one evening, watching the sunset over the city, Malik felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future of education was unfolding, and he was right in the middle of it. And that was exactly where he was meant to be. It was a bright Tuesday morning when Malik found himself staring at the same computer screen he'd been staring at for hours the previous night. The latest update for InteractiveHistory.com was finally in place, but something still didn't feel right. Despite the improvements, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something vital, a spark that could take their platform from being good to truly transformative. He stared at the data in front of him. User growth had slowed slightly, the most recent marketing campaign hadn't delivered the numbers they'd hoped for, and there were a growing number of educators who still felt like the site wasn't as engaging as it could be. Something's got to change, Malik muttered to himself. This can't just be about adding more features. We need to rethink this. He wasn't alone in his frustration. Sarah had noticed the same issues. As their head of product development, she'd been managing a small team that was tasked with rolling out updates to improve the site's interactivity. They'd added new features like quizzes, discussion boards, and gamified history challenges, but it hadn't been enough to boost engagement in the way they had hoped. After lunch, Sarah called Malik to a meeting. "Malik, I've been looking over the data," she said, her voice serious. "It's not just the new features we need to focus on. We need to think bigger. Our original goal was to make history feel alive for students, but right now, it still feels too much like a textbook. We need to bring history to life." Malik frowned. "So, what do you mean?" "I think we need to expand beyond just content. We need to create a community, a space where students can truly connect with history and with each other," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "We need to bring in real-world elements. Imagine if students could actively participate in history. What if they could collaborate with their peers in real time to solve historical mysteries? What if we could incorporate live events or even virtual field trips to historical sites?" Malik leaned back in his chair, considering her words. The idea was bold, and it certainly felt like the direction they needed to take, but it would require a lot of resources, and trust. They weren't exactly in a position to make drastic changes without some serious planning. "You're talking about a complete overhaul," Malik said slowly. "That's a huge risk. Do you really think this is the right move?" Sarah's expression softened, and she nodded. "I do. Right now, we're offering students a history lesson. But what if we could offer them an experience? An adventure. Something that feels real, something that goes beyond reading about history and actually lets them live it. I think that's how we get them to care. If we make history feel real, they'll want to engage with it." Malik sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. The idea was risky, but it also felt like the kind of game changer that could really set them apart. If they could pull it off, it would revolutionize how students interacted with history. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there were a lot of unknowns to deal with. "All right," Malik said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's move forward with it. But we'll need a clear plan. Let's outline what this would look like, and we can bring it to the team for feedback." The next few weeks were filled with brainstorming sessions, late nights, and long discussions with the team. Sarah and Malik worked together to refine the concept of bringing history to life. They researched existing virtual experiences and explored partnerships with museums, universities, and historical sites to create virtual field trips and immersive historical reenactments. They began laying the groundwork for a series of live events where students could participate in simulated historical events, like the signing of the Declaration of Independence or the Battle of Gettysburg, where they would take on roles as historical figures and work together to solve challenges based on real events. The team also began developing a new feature called History Projects, where students from different schools could collaborate in real time to work on projects related to historical events, creating a global classroom that transcended geographical boundaries. Students would be able to research, discuss, and share ideas on a shared digital platform, giving them a hands-on, collaborative experience that brought history into their own hands. The moment of truth came when they were ready to present the new concept to their investors. Malik's heart raced as he prepared the pitch for Claire and the rest of the team. He knew that the risks were high, and they would need the backing of their investors if they were going to pull this off. During the meeting, Malik took a deep breath and began. InteractiveHistory.com has always been about revolutionizing the way students learn history. We've done well with that, but we've always felt there's more we could offer. We want to create an experience, not just a platform for reading and quizzes, but a space where students can interact with history, collaborate with peers, and explore the past in a more immersive way. He paused, watching Claire and the others as they listened intently. Imagine if students could work together to solve historical puzzles in real time. What if they could experience history as though they were there, walking through ancient civilizations or standing in the middle of a famous battle? We're going beyond what we've done so far. We want to make history come alive. There was a moment of silence in the room as the investors absorbed the idea. Then, Claire spoke up. I'll be honest, this is a huge shift. You're asking for a lot of resources, and it's a big gamble. But I can see the potential. If you can make this work, it will change the landscape of education. Malik exhaled, relieved to have their support. We believe it's possible. We've seen what students are capable of when they're given the right tools and the right environment. This isn't just a business move, it's about changing the way we teach, the way we learn. We're ready to take that leap. Claire nodded thoughtfully. All right, Malik. We're on board. Let's see what you can do. As Malik walked out of the meeting, a sense of excitement bubbled within him. They had the go-ahead. The project was officially underway. But with that approval came even greater challenges. The stakes were higher than ever. Now, they had to deliver. Over the next several weeks, Malik and his team worked tirelessly, coordinating with museums and educational institutions, finalizing partnerships, and creating the new immersive content. They also began to hire experts in digital storytelling, history, and gamification to ensure they were creating an experience that was not only educational but also engaging and fun. With each step, Malik could feel the weight of the challenge, but he also felt a growing sense of confidence. This was it, the breakthrough they had been waiting for. And now, it was time to show the world just how powerful history could be when it was brought to life. By the time they were ready for the official launch, Malik stood on the cusp of something extraordinary. The future of education had just become a little more tangible. And with the support of his team, his investors, and his unwavering belief in the platform, he was more determined than ever to make this leap, and show the world that learning history could be an adventure. The stage was set. The adventure was about to begin. The weeks leading up to the launch of the new features were a blur for Malik. Days and nights blurred together in a rush of final testing, debugging, and fine-tuning. His team was working harder than ever, with each member focused on making sure the immersive historical experiences would live up to their ambitious vision. It wasn't just about offering a new product, it was about setting a new standard for education itself. The pressure was mounting, and Malik could feel it in his bones. As the founder and CEO of InteractiveHistory.com, he had to make sure everything worked flawlessly. The stakes had never been higher, and he was acutely aware that the success of this new direction could either solidify their place in the market or mark the beginning of their downfall. The big day arrived, and Malik stood in his office, watching the clock tick down. The platform was set to launch at 10 a.m., and everything was in place. Virtual field trips, historical role-playing simulations, live events, everything they'd promised to bring to life was ready. Malik's heart raced with anticipation, but there was also a sense of calm. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, the risks, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights. He couldn't turn back now. He glanced at his phone, checking the time. There was a message from Sarah, "It's go time. Are you ready?" Malik quickly replied, "As ready as I'll ever be." At 9:55 a.m., the team gathered in the small meeting room adjacent to Malik's office. Everyone was nervous, but there was also a sense of excitement in the air. Sarah was at the front of the room, doing a final check on the live streams and interactive features. Jalen was pacing, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy that was contagious. "We're minutes away," Malik said, trying to project calm. "This is it. Let's make it count." They all gathered around as Malik took a deep breath and clicked the button to launch the new version of interactivehistory.com. The website went live, and the first wave of users began to flood the platform. At first, there was silence. No one spoke. Everyone was watching their screens, waiting for the feedback to pour in. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about how people would react to the new experience. And then, within minutes, the first comment came in. "Whoa, this is amazing. I'm actually in ancient Rome right now," said one user. Another followed, "This is insane. I'm standing in the middle of the Boston Tea Party. The details are incredible." Malik's heart skipped a beat. It was working. The platform was alive, and students were already engaging with history in a way he had only dreamed of. Jalen, who had been nervously checking his phone, suddenly burst into a grin. "Dude, check it out. People are going wild for this." Sarah was already on her laptop, pulling up live metrics. "Look at this," she said, showing the spike in user activity. "We're seeing a massive jump in engagement. This is exactly what we were hoping for." Malik felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about getting the features right, it was about connecting with people on a deeper level, about making history real. And they had done it. Over the next few hours, the team monitored user feedback, responding to inquiries and tweaking the platform as needed. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Teachers were praising the live events, with students actively participating in discussions about the historical figures they were portraying. One middle school teacher commented, "This is the most engaged I've seen my students in years. They're not just reading about history, they're living it." The immersive historical reenactments were a hit. In one event, students had to work together to navigate a series of challenges during the American Revolution, making choices based on actual historical scenarios. In another, they experienced the life of a gladiator in ancient Rome, making difficult decisions about survival in the Colosseum. Interactivehistory.com was quickly gaining traction, and Malik knew that this success was only the beginning. They had done more than just build a new feature, they had created an entirely new way for students to experience history, something that no one had done before. By the end of the day, Malik stood in the office, staring at the glowing screen that showed the day's analytics. The numbers were impressive, but it was the feedback that really struck him. One user had written, "I've never felt connected to history before, but now I feel like I'm a part of it. Thank you for making history come alive." Malik read the comment again. It was everything he had hoped for. The platform wasn't just offering information, it was offering an experience, one that students would carry with them for a lifetime. The next morning, Malik was up early, going through the final reports. Everything was going smoothly, but there was no time to rest. They had just launched a new era of education, but the hard work had only just begun. The platform was gaining momentum, and they needed to keep up with the demand. There were already talks of expanding to new subjects beyond history, developing similar interactive features for science, literature, and even math. Malik knew they had a long road ahead of them, but with the success of this launch, he was more determined than ever to keep pushing forward. Later that week, Malik met with Claire and the investors to present the initial results. As he stood in front of the boardroom, showing the data on the screen, Claire couldn't hide her smile. "I have to say, Malik, this is incredible. You've exceeded our expectations. The growth is amazing, and more importantly, the engagement numbers are off the charts. You've done it." Malik felt a surge of pride. "It's not just me. It's the entire team. We all believed in this vision, and it's paying off." Claire nodded. "This is only the beginning, Malik. You've set a new standard for educational platforms. I'm excited to see where this goes." Malik left the meeting feeling a sense of accomplishment, but also a sense of urgency. They had reached a milestone, but there was so much more to do. The future was wide open, and Malik knew that interactivehistory.com had the potential to change the entire educational landscape. As he stood in his office, looking out over the city, Malik thought about how far he had come. From a college student with a dream to an entrepreneur leading a revolutionary platform, he had come a long way. But there was still so much to be done. Interactivehistory.com wasn't just about learning history, it was about shaping the future of education itself. And Malik was determined to make sure that future was filled with discovery, excitement, and possibility for generations to come. The journey was just beginning. With his vision taking shape, Malik knew one thing for certain: the adventure was far from over. Malik stood in front of the large window of his office, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the skyline. It had been several weeks since the launch of the new features on interactivehistory.com, and the results were beyond what he had anticipated. The platform was experiencing explosive growth, and there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Students were now flocking to the site in droves. Teachers were integrating the new immersive history lessons into their classrooms. Interactive projects, like solving historical mysteries and participating in live events, were becoming essential parts of the learning experience. The feedback had been overwhelmingly positive, and the user engagement metrics were at an all-time high. Malik had created a revolution in education, but this success was only the beginning. One morning, as Malik was sipping his coffee and scanning through his emails, he received a message that would change everything. It was from a large educational conference in New York City, the kind of event that brought together the biggest names in the world of education and technology. The message was an invitation to present at the conference. Dear Malik Turner, we've been closely following the success of interactivehistory.com and would be honored if you would consider speaking at our upcoming Educational Technology Conference in New York City. Your platform has made a significant impact, and we would love for you to share your vision with our audience. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, Jenna Reynolds, Conference Coordinator. Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was a huge opportunity, a chance to showcase interactivehistory.com to an even larger audience, and perhaps bring the platform to the next level. The thought of speaking at such a prestigious event was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. He had no doubt that it would be a pivotal moment in the journey of his company. He typed a quick reply, "Thank you for the invitation. I would be honored to speak at the conference. Please let me know the next steps." Over the next few weeks, the preparations for the conference took over much of Malik's time. He spent hours working on his presentation, making sure it encapsulated the heart of what they had accomplished at interactivehistory.com. This wasn't just about showcasing the platform's success, it was about telling a story of how technology, creativity, and education could work hand in hand to transform the learning experience for students all over the world. When the day of the conference finally arrived, Malik found himself in a bustling hotel lobby, surrounded by the best and brightest in the field of educational technology. There were people from all over the world, entrepreneurs, educators, investors, and innovators, all with a common goal: to change the future of education. Malik was scheduled to speak in the afternoon, and as the time drew closer, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was his chance to make a real impact, to bring his vision to a global stage. Finally, it was his turn to speak. Malik took the stage, greeted by a sea of faces staring back at him. The room was packed, and the buzz of conversation died down as he approached the podium. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone, and then began. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. I'm Malik Turner, and I'm the founder of InteractiveHistory.com, a platform that is revolutionizing the way we experience history. I'm here today to share with you how we've used technology not just to teach history, but to make it come alive. He paused, making eye contact with several people in the audience. When we first launched InteractiveHistory.com, we didn't just want to create another educational platform. We wanted to transform the way students engage with history. We wanted to create an experience that wasn't just about facts on a page, but about living history. And we wanted to make that experience accessible to everyone. Malik went on to describe the journey of the platform, how it had evolved from a simple online tool into a fully immersive learning experience. He spoke about the live events, the interactive simulations, and the collaboration between students from different parts of the world. He showed clips from some of the historical reenactments and role-playing events, letting the audience see for themselves how powerful the platform had become. As he wrapped up his presentation, Malik felt a sense of pride. The feedback from the audience was positive, and he could see the sparks of inspiration in the eyes of the educators and tech experts in the room. But what really took him by surprise was the interest from investors and corporate partners who approached him afterward, eager to learn more about the platform. One of them, a well-known venture capitalist named Tom Bennett, shook Malik's hand. Malik, I've been following InteractiveHistory.com for a while now, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Your platform is not only innovative, it's necessary. I'd like to talk more about a partnership. Malik's mind raced. This was the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for. If he could secure the right partnerships, InteractiveHistory.com could expand faster than he had ever imagined. The next few months saw a flurry of activity as Malik and his team explored new opportunities for growth. With the success of the conference and the attention they had received, they were now poised to expand the platform beyond history. The idea of applying their immersive, interactive learning experiences to other subjects, like science, literature, and even mathematics, began to take shape. They began collaborating with subject matter experts, educators, and developers to bring these new subjects to life in the same way they had done with history. Their goal was clear: to create an all-encompassing learning platform where students could immerse themselves in any subject and collaborate with others to solve real-world problems. Malik was excited, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. He had built something extraordinary, but it was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't just about building a successful business, it was about creating a movement, one that could change the way people learn for generations to come. As InteractiveHistory.com continued to grow, Malik found himself facing new challenges. Managing the rapid expansion of the platform, dealing with new partnerships, and ensuring that the team remained true to the vision were all constant concerns. But he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. The dream he had started with, making history come alive, was expanding into something much larger than he had ever imagined. It was no longer just about history. It was about creating a new kind of education, one that made learning exciting, interactive, and deeply engaging. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Malik sat down at his desk. He opened his email and found a message from Sarah. "Hey Malik, I've been thinking about what you said earlier about the future of InteractiveHistory.com. You know, it's not just about making history interactive. It's about giving students the tools to create their own future, to explore, to build, to question. We've started something big, but we can make it bigger. Let's keep pushing boundaries." Malik smiled, feeling the weight of her words sink in. Sarah was right. This was just the beginning. InteractiveHistory.com wasn't just a tool for learning, it was a platform for shaping the future. With a renewed sense of determination, Malik closed his laptop and stood up, ready to take on whatever came next. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The months following the conference were a whirlwind. InteractiveHistory.com's platform continued to evolve at a rapid pace. They had expanded to other subjects, creating immersive, interactive learning experiences in science, literature, and even math. It was no longer just a platform for history, it was becoming a one-stop hub for education, a space where students could explore, engage, and grow. Malik found himself balancing the excitement of progress with the pressure of leadership. The team had grown, and with it, the stakes. He was now leading a company with global reach, and the responsibility to guide it through this next phase was heavier than ever. But there was also a sense of fulfillment. They weren't just building a business, they were building something that could fundamentally change the way the world learned. And Malik knew that was the most rewarding thing he could do. It was a cool morning in the fall when Malik received the phone call that would change everything once again. "Malik, I've got some exciting news," Claire's voice crackled through the line. "We've been offered a partnership with a massive global education company. They've been following our progress and are very interested in working with us to expand our platform worldwide. This could take us to an entirely new level." Malik's mind raced. This was the moment he had been working for. A partnership of this magnitude could propel InteractiveHistory.com to an even greater scale. But there was a catch. The global education company was asking for significant equity in exchange for the partnership. Malik would have to make a choice, retain full control of the company or accept the partnership and grow at an unprecedented rate. He spent the next few days deliberating. The decision weighed heavily on him. On the one hand, the partnership could bring massive resources and expertise to the table, allowing them to reach millions more students and make an even bigger impact. On the other hand, he had built this company from the ground up, and the thought of giving up a part of it was unsettling. Malik knew that he couldn't make this decision alone. He called a team meeting, inviting Sarah, Jalen, Claire, and other key members to discuss the future of InteractiveHistory.com. "We've come a long way," Malik began, pacing back and forth. "We've built something that's already making waves in the world of education. But now we've got this opportunity to expand globally. The question is, do we take it, or do we stay independent and grow at our own pace?" Sarah was the first to speak. "I think we have to consider the impact we can make with this partnership. We've always had big dreams, and this could help us achieve them. Think about the resources, the connections, and the exposure. We could reach so many more students." Jalen, however, wasn't so sure. "I get what you're saying, Sarah, but at what cost? If we give away too much equity, we risk losing control. We've been able to make our own decisions up to this point. Do we want to risk that for the sake of growth?" Claire, always the pragmatic one, weighed in. "It's a tough decision, but we can't ignore the potential here. The education market is massive, and this partnership would give us the credibility and reach we need. But I agree with Jalen, it's about balance. We need to make sure that whatever we do, we don't lose our vision." Malik listened intently, taking everything in. The decision wasn't easy, but he had always believed that the heart of InteractiveHistory.com was about making history come alive, making education accessible, and empowering students. No matter what, he had to make sure they stayed true to those principles. That evening, Malik took a long walk around the city. He thought back to the beginning, when he was just a college student with an idea and a passion for education. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the sacrifices he had made, and the people who had supported him along the way. When he returned home, he made his decision. The next morning, Malik met with Claire to finalize their response to the global education company. They had agreed on a compromise: they would accept the partnership, but with strict terms that would ensure they maintained creative control over the platform and its direction. The deal was made in such a way that both parties could benefit from the growth, but Malik and his team would still have the final say on the vision of interactivehistory.com. The announcement of the partnership was made a week later. The media coverage was overwhelming. Headlines praised the groundbreaking deal, and investors were excited about the future. Interactivehistory.com was now positioned to become a global leader in educational technology. But Malik didn't feel the same rush of excitement that others did. Instead, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about growth or recognition, it was about fulfilling the promise he had made to students everywhere, to make learning a transformative experience. With the partnership in place, interactivehistory.com began to expand globally. The platform was launched in multiple countries, each with a tailored approach to meet local educational needs. The team worked tirelessly to translate the immersive experiences and adapt them to various cultures, ensuring that history wasn't just a story told from one perspective, it was an experience that resonated with people all over the world. Malik traveled extensively, visiting schools and classrooms in countries across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Everywhere he went, he saw the same spark in students' eyes, the same excitement that had fueled his own passion for learning all those years ago. He realized that this was his true legacy. It wasn't the technology or the money, it was the impact on future generations. Interactivehistory.com was not just a platform, it was a movement. And it was changing the way students around the world experienced education. Years passed, and Malik's company grew. The platform evolved, adding new features, new subjects, and even more ways for students to engage with history and beyond. The core values of the company remained the same: to empower students, to make learning an adventure, and to never stop pushing the boundaries of what was possible. In a quiet moment, Malik sat down with Sarah, Jalen, and Claire in the office that had once felt so small to him. "We did it," Malik said, looking around the room. "We really did it." Sarah smiled. "You know, Malik, it's not just about the success. It's about the change we've made. We've shown the world that education doesn't have to be boring. It can be exciting, immersive, and most of all, meaningful." Jalen added, "We've created something that will outlast all of us. Our work has made an impact, and that's what matters." Malik nodded, his heart full of gratitude. This journey had been more than he had ever imagined. And as he looked toward the future, he knew one thing for sure: the journey wasn't over yet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?